People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people.
V for Vendetta is a graphic novel written by Alan Moore with art by David Lloyd. It depicts a near-future England that has become a fascist police state. One individual stands up to the government, known only as V. The limited comic series contains Alan Moore's personal politics, most notably anarchism. The film version, which did not involve Moore, presented a similar fascist government but removed nearly all mentions of anarchism save for a few oblique references and some of its aspects and features under different names. This was, perhaps, an effort not to disenfranchise its target audience, who, in 2006, were more keen to rebel against the waning George W. Bush administration than adopt anarchism as their political philosophy. Anarchism is seen as an extremist worldview, but much of that is based on misconceptions about what anarchism actually is. In the graphic novel, V remarks on this misunderstanding, telling Evie that anarchism is not about chaos. Anarchism does not mean without laws, it means without rulers. Anarchism is generally not about planting bombs and throwing bricks through windows. V engages in violence, but this is the direct result of living under a fascist government, and V's understandable desire to overthrow it. In practice, anarchism is simply a system of voluntary cooperation with a limited or non-existent hierarchy. Chaos is actually the opposite of what anarchism hopes to achieve. Anarchism states a social hierarchy, a system that ranks people in various degrees of authority, does not justify itself. The Northfire party of V for Vendetta contains a social hierarchy. A leader pictured here in Big Brother vision, his immediate underlings, meaning the heads of various departments, lesser government officials under them like Fingerman, V for Vendetta's lethal police force, and everyone else, people without authority. Unless justification for a social hierarchy can be plainly given, then it is illegitimate and should be dismantled. This is what anarchists believe. Anarchists like V believe that the burden of proof to justify this authority lies with the government, and since the government cannot justify its hierarchy and all the problems that come with it, said government must be removed and be replaced with something more egalitarian. Anarchism, or anarchy, or anarchist are often words used pejoratively and as synonyms for chaos or lawlessness. Even I have used it erroneously as shorthand. But philosophically and politically, that is simply not true. Anarchism does not reject all authority, only coercive authority. 19th century anarchist and philosopher Emma Goldman once wrote, "Anarchism is the great liberator of man from the phantoms that have held him captive. It is the arbiter and pacifier of the two forces for individual and social harmony. To accomplish that unity, anarchism has declared war on the pernicious influences which have so far prevented the harmonious blending of individual and social instincts, the individual and society." So, what does V believe? Well, as a self-described anarchist, V undoubtedly opposes both capitalism and the state. V for Vendetta was originally written during the days of Margaret Thatcher. Under the tenets of Thatcherism, capitalism was seen as synonymous with freedom, which is a kind of doublespeak. In reality, capitalism grants incredible power and freedom among the few, and grants lesser resources and therefore lesser freedom to everyone else. The leader of the Northfire party, Adam Susan in the comic and Adam Sutler in the film, retain some of these properties from Thatcher. In the film, capitalism in the form of a pharmaceutical company helps usher in fascism. Some would call this an abuse of capitalism, but anarchists would say that this is the standard usage and intended outcome of capitalism: consolidation of power and authority. Capitalism is guided by private ownership of the means of production. Anarchists like V would oppose this because workers are subject to the will of their employers, and because those struggling to make ends meet do not have a perfect safety net. In the comic, Evie is forced to become a sex worker. In the film, she works at a television station and believes that her boss is trying to seduce her. The twist is that she is mistaken. Her boss is a homosexual, but this is something workers generally face: exploitation by a capitalist hierarchy. Side note, anarcho-capitalism is a misuse of the term anarchism, and it has virtually nothing to do with anarchism and is actually a diametrically opposed right-wing ideology. It's a co-opting of left-wing terminology. Capitalism and the state are intertwined. They feed each other, keeping each other in power. In the film, we see this as a rich television host who is also a puppet of the Northfire Party. For anarchists, the state is a powerful institution that monopolizes the use of violence and marks out territory for which it can exercise and maintain said violence. This might seem hyperbolic at a glance, but think about it. The state is allowed to perform violence. The police can arrest us and shoot us. We are obviously not allowed to arrest the state or shoot the state, meaning the police. The military is allowed to invade the borders of other states and kill people who are under the rule of that state. We are not. So the state monopolizes violence by claiming exclusive ownership of it. In V for Vendetta, the Fingermen use violence against Evie. Later, they use violence against her boss. To anarchists, state violence is unacceptable, and we see an example of the people's breaking point here as they finally exercise violence against a Fingerman who has killed someone. One could argue that the state only uses legal violence, but that is the point. The state decides what they may do. They create the rules for themselves, and when they break the rules, the power of the same state defends themselves from prosecution more often than not. While the voters in V for Vendetta might believe that electing a new leader with less abhorrent politics is the only answer, V concludes that the state itself is unnecessary and may be causing more harm than good. This is generally what anarchists believe. Not all anarchists believe that the state must be destroyed by violence, though. Anarchists are typically not, well, V. Anarcho-pacifism is a brand of anarchism, for example. Anarchists, in principle, generally oppose other powerful systems and other negative aspects of society that are sometimes indoctrinated by the state and contain hierarchies, such as racism, homophobia, and transphobia. In V for Vendetta, homosexuality is outlawed. Evie's employer, a homosexual, must remain closeted. Racism and Islamophobia are also referenced in the film. Anarchism believes in an egalitarian society, and because of this, racism, homophobia, sexism, and other forms of discrimination are rejected. V sings about this in This Vicious Cabaret, a song from the graphic novel that is unfortunately absent from the film adaptation. Remember, anarchists believe that hierarchies do not justify themselves, which means social hierarchies that create discrimination are rejected under anarchism. So what does V want? What do anarchists want? Well, in contrast to what popular culture and dictionary illiteracy contends, anarchists do not want chaos. An anarchist is not someone who spray paints an A on the side of a building because they think that makes them cool. Anarchists want there to be laws, but they want those laws to be created by consensus. An anarchist society is horizontal, not vertical, meaning it would aim to diminish or outright dismantle social and economic hierarchies. Anarchism is not a lawless, post-apocalyptic Mad Max world. Anarchism is more like revolutionary Spain in the 1930s before the fascists took over, or the many anarchist communities and cities across the world in the present day. When V believes his work is done and prepares for his Viking funeral, the England that he leaves behind is not meant to be one of disorder. It is simply meant to be one of a new order. Anarchism is not something that happens overnight, like at the end of the film. It's more of an incremental process. Also, anarchism does not mean never participating in our current government, like voting, because not participating in the government in one way or another would leave it open to greater control by unsavory, dangerous entities. Anarchists vote and participate and try to make the world better. In fact, 20th century anarchist writer Edward Abbey once said, "Anarchism is democracy taken seriously." I hope this has been helpful in defining anarchism and dispelling some myths about what it is and what it is not. Since anarchist decisions are made communally, there is no one version of what a society built on anarchism looks like. In V for Vendetta, we only know what England will not be following the uprising. It will not be fascism anymore. More than anything, fascism runs contrary to everything the fictional V and real-world anarchists believe in. England under Northfire meets nearly all the criteria for fascism as outlined by Dr. Lawrence Britt. powerful and continuing nationalism, disdain for the recognition of human rights, identification of enemies or scapegoats as a unifying cause, rampant sexism, controlled mass media, obsession with national security, obsession with crime and punishment, and more. People who live under an oppressive regime sometimes do not realize it is happening until it is happening directly to themselves, and even then, some people are, to borrow a phrase, comfortable in their chains. The citizenry of V for Vendetta, according to V himself, believe in what Norsefire did to take power because of the offer of safety. Security is often the rallying cry of fascism, us and them. V's actions are questionable. Alan Moore originally wanted his readers to wonder whether or not V was justified in what he did. After all, he committed violence. This is a question that has re-entered popular consciousness with the rise of people with fascist worldviews attempting to gain power and shift the Overton window. How can we peacefully coexist with monstrous people who are not trying to coexist with us, but rather eliminate us? Obviously, there is a great deal of middle ground between fascism and anarchism, but presented with the horrors of the far-right extreme of the fascist state, can a moderate position truly be enough to destroy it? Historically speaking, that has not been true. How many criteria of fascism is necessary to be achieved before people are justified in taking greater action? 1, half, most? At the point of most, after power has been consolidated, it may be too late. Hi everyone. If you like what I do, please click on the orange Patreon link below. That's how this show happens. It's also how you can request an episode. There are also a lot of other perks for being a patron, so check it out. The information is on my Patreon page. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you next week.